business partners. I think that's it. Adam, very excited to hear about this. And we have Bartram's Ixia blooming at Native Park too. So go over and look at it because it's beautiful. Thanks. Okay, Adam.
All right, thank you, Jody. My name is Adam Arendell. I'm one of the directors at the Ixia chapter. And so I first saw the Bartram's Ixia in 2016. And it was around the same time that I got involved with the chapter. So for me, it's kind of an honor to be here tonight and share with you all what I've learned over the years about our chapter's namesake. So our chapter was first started in 2006. And like every chapter, or most of the chapters of the Florida Native Plant Society, they take on the name of a unique and special plant or flower from that area. And so our chapter is quite fitting to have the Bartram's Ixia as our namesake. So this flower is highly endemic. It's very localized. It's only found in a few sites in our area. So, you know, it's a great thing that we have this as our namesake. So what exactly is the Bartram's Ixia? It's in the iris family. It's in the Iridaceae. And modern day science has given it the name Calydorea caelestina. And the Calydorea is two Latin names. It's cali, which means sheath or covered, and dori is meaning spear-shaped. And that's alluding to the shape of the flower bud before it's opened. It's kind of the shape of a spear. And then the Latin is caelestina, and that's the Latin word for caelestis. And caelestis means sky or heaven, and they're referring to the color of the flower. And so it's had a few names over the years. William Bartram, who first discovered it, gave it the name Ixia caelestina. And Ixia is actually a genus of iris that's found in Africa. So he was more familiar with that genus during those times. And later on, modern scientists figured out that that's not really a good name for it. The Bartram's Ixia is much more unique from the irises found in Africa. So they ended up calling it Salpingo stylus. Now, Salpingo stylus is Greek, and that's from the word salpingo or salpinx, which means a trumpet-shaped tube. And they're alluding to the style. And that's the end of the Latin lesson I promised for tonight. So, but if you see the right here, this is the style, trumpet-like style, super unique. There's nothing else that looks like the Bartram's Ixia out there. The main characteristics are the 6 petals, and they're typically this like blue-violet color. But I've seen them like in a darker purple. I've seen them in blues, even in pink hues. And also has these three bright yellow anthers and the large trumpet-like style that I was seeing. So the flowers, they're pretty showy and pretty big. I've seen them around between 2 and 3 inches. Big ones are around 3 inches, and they really catch your eye. What's up? 3 inches. Like that. And they're much bigger than the actual foliage of the plant. The plants typically range around 8 inches to 16 inches tall. And if it's not in flower, they're really hard to find. They're typically just in a grass leaf stage. And the leaves are real thin and they're pleated.
Is still recorded.
Is it still recording? All right. I hope the Zoom people are still hearing this. So anyways, Britain only had the Florida territory for around 20 years. So they were quick to go into the territory to kind of, explore and check things out. And so Bartram's main goal was to collect seeds, make drawings, and take specimens of all these unfamiliar plants. And he shipped all of these plants, seeds, and stuff that he found in drawings over to London to his benefactors. And so later on, William Bartram, from his journals, he made this book called William Bartram's Travels. And it's a full-on account of his entire expedition and adventures that he did in this area. And it's a really awesome book. And if you're a fan of like Florida history or just Florida flora or just the animals in Florida, you really like this book. It's really awesome. And I actually have it up here later on if you all want to check it out. So Bartram first discovered the Ixia in 1774. he was around the Dexter Lake area, which is Volusia County. And Dexter Lake is south of Lake George. And Lake George is a giant lake. He compared it to like an ocean lake, pretty much. And so I'm pretty sure that he found the Ixia in between this area and New Smyrna. New Smyrna actually has more of these upland areas where you're going to find the Ixia, where the pine flatwoods are. So I'm pretty sure that's where he was at when he founded it. But it wasn't discovered again for another 150 years, just so, because it was a really mysterious plant and really hard to find. So, but it wasn't it was proven to still exist in 1931 by John Kunkel Small, who was an earlier botanical explorer and also a really great taxonomist as well. He's really well known for naming a lot of plants and discovering a lot of plants as well. And then in 1940, William Morrell, who was actually a famous mycologist, established its range. And he actually was into botany and other taxonomy as well. So he was an interesting character. But in fast forward till 1988, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they did these extensive surveys for the Ixia, and they ended up finding it in its current 7-county range. And this map right here shows all the data from that survey from the 1988. And I have to shout out to David Martin. He was the main biologist on this, and he's actually a longtime board of directors of the Florida Native Plant Society. And as you can see here, this map is split, so there is some overlap. And I couldn't, it was kind of skewed. It was kind of hard to make it one map, so I just left it as it is. But the map on the right here, you can see on the very top is the start of 295. And underneath that, you'll see Jointon Creek Preserve, that little peninsula. And then underneath that is the Fruit Cove area. So that kind of gives you kind of a location of where what we're talking about. And then a map on the left here, the lake right here, this is near the center. That's Kingsley Lake. That's Camp Blanding right there. So, and I ended up overlapping all of these points on a Google map just to kind of to see like if I could still find some Ixias. And the majority of these areas are really just developed or have roads on them. So it's every time, if I'm ever out in these areas, I kind of make a note to kind of visit them to see if something is still there. So with all this work from that 1988 survey, they were able to get it listed as a state endangered plant or a species in Florida. And so out of 60 or more of the populations that have been reported since the 1900s or the early 1900s, most have not been seen recently, and only a few of these populations are known on conservation areas. So this makes it very vulnerable to extinction. And NatureServe, who's a predominant conservation and science website, they've categorized it as a G2 imperiled species. And what that means is they categorize that a G2 is only around 6 to 20 occurrences. So it's really, really, vulnerable to extinction that way. So its current distribution is, and this is from just from my observations and from friends and from iNaturalist data, typically everything is in Duval and Clay County. So those are all the recent sightings, and most of them are all on well-managed and protected preserves, thankfully. So yeah, exactly. So there have been sightings in St. John's County. These are all from 2013, but they're all in the Nocatee Parkway area, which this area has experienced extensive development over the years. And all the roadways where there used to be Ixias are all been widened. So it doesn't really look likely that we'll find populations there, but we really just need to drive out there to see during the Ixia season. And so Putnam, Bradford, Baker, and Union counties, these all have historical vouchers, specimens from the early 30s and 50s. And since these counties they're kind of rural counties, they don't see as much development as Duval or St. John's. It's highly likely that they're still out there, or some of the populations are still there. So we just need to do more roadside surveys. Yeah.
I'm curious about how long to do an accurate survey. Do you need to do it during blooming season and get out there early?
Yeah.
It's so hard to identify when there's no fire.
Typically, it's like that season window, or if you know where a fire has been. Typically, that's how you can kind of count down.
And then you gotta do the morning when there's no fire.
Yep. And so this map right here in the circle, that is all from iNaturalist data. And what iNaturalist does, if you upload any species that's considered endangered or threatened, it will default to obscure the location, which is a good thing because a lot of people, they unfortunately still poach plants, specifically like orchids and carnivorous plants, and they'll use iNaturalist observations to do that. So it's a good thing that iNaturalist defaults that. So all these red squares that you see, they're not exact points. They're kind of like general locations, and that's why they seem a little off. So, and the Bartram's Ixia, it's really challenging to find. If it's not in flower, it's in this like grass leaf stage basically, and they're almost impossible to find with that. And it dies back every year, and it has a little storage bulb, and it stays dormant for many years, and it's just waiting for fire to come through and clear things out. And what fire does as well, it kind of gives it a nutrient load as well from those ashes. So it kind of like wakes it up. And like a lot of these plants or these habitats, fire is it's a big component to it. You get much more higher biodiversity rates when these fires come through, and that's why we have the Bartram's Ixia. And this photo right here is of one of our really well-maintained preserves. If anyone can guess where this is. Yeah, Julington, Durban. And there's actually Bartram's Ixias in this photo, if you guys can see. I'll give you a hint. There's one right here, and there's a few dozen more in this photo, but you can just see it's in bloom here, and it's still hard to find. So that's why it's a very challenging flower to find. Yeah.
People on Zoom where to see it.
Can they hear me? Can they hear me? Okay.
I just sent a chat.
Okay. So best time of year to find it is mid-April through late June, but we've seen it blooming even till late October. And we were on a chapter plant walk a few years back, and one of our attendees found an Ixia flower in late October. So that's pretty rare, but it's also very cool to kind of get that data point, But typically, after fire, we've counted about 34 to 60 days is when you can expect them to bloom, which is kind of cool. And it kind of shows you that, fire is a life giver in these habitats. Fire gets a real bad rap for destroying things and being destructive. But when in reality, it wakes these habitats up, and, we get much more heavier biodiversity in these areas when fire comes through. So. Then the photo on the right here, that's of Brett Moyer of Bluebird Pharmacy. And this is after a fire. And this is what happens if you have a healthy population of Ixias, which you can see these like super blooms. And it's quite an amazing sight to see. And this photo right here is by Emily Bell. And it kind of reminded me, when I first saw it, I was thinking about what William Bartram saw in his book Travels. And there's a page where he's talking about he's walking in this like savanna, and there's all these wildflowers, and he's just really like thrilled. And all of a sudden he sees this like mass bloom of Ixias, and he says, "Behold, these rural fields of cerulean Ixia." And that's, it's kind of cool to see that. So you got to go early. The Bartram's Ixia, it flowers. They start to open around sunrise, and they close completely, usually around 10. And that's depending on the weather, of course. And from personal accounts, I've been out a few times when the weather has been very overcast or a little chilly in the morning, and the flowers will open really slowly. And they'll just take their sweet time, and they'll stay open until noon if it's really overcast out. So it's kind of cool experience just to kind of sit down and watch an Ixia take about an hour to bloom. So the best habitat for the Bartram's Ixia is mesic pine flatwoods. Mesic means wet. So wet pine flatwoods and savanna habitats. And this right here is of Julington Durban Creek Preserve. And for me, this is like the perfect image of like the habitat of the pine flatwoods. You can see the pines are really far apart. There's not many pines in there. You can walk through them really easily. And the understory is really low, and it's super diverse. Like if you put a square out here, you'd probably count easily 100 plants or so. It's just when fire comes through these habitats, like the areas are much more biodiverse as far as plant habitat. So, but you'll have Ixias all the way up into this area in the foreground and even into the background as well.
How far from the endemic?
It's pretty close. but I mean, still got to walk about a mile. Here's another really good habitat. This is in Bayard Conservation Area. And this is all slash pines. And you can still see they're kind of widely, the trees are widely spaced and understory is still kind of open. And when I took this photo, this area kind of needed a fire. As you can see, the palmettos are starting to grow back. But I've seen tons of Bartram Ixias growing through here when they burn it. So
The picture on our events newsletter was Bayard Conservation
Nice.
Area. Picture I took with Ixia.
Bayard is a wonderful spot. It's a really cool spot. So there are some associated plants with the Bartram's Ixia, and the majority of these plants that are associated are in the same habitat as the mesic pine flatwoods. They're pretty much the same combination of plants. And those are your pine species, so pond pine / longleaf, blackroot, which is a type of aster, your meadow beauties, wiregrasses, your gallberries, which is the holly that has the black fruit. You're going to get a whole bunch of milkweeds, bog buttons, and lady tresses, which are my favorite. Those are the spiranthes. And the photo right here, these are Sarracenia minors with the Bartram's Ixia. And so this is a really cool photo right here. So it just kind of shows you, what plants are associated with it. And this is just a small list, by the way, too. I mean, there's a whole list of hundreds of plants that can be associates of the Ixia and the habitat as well. There is a lookalike, and it's called the Nemestylus floridana. The Nemestylus, the common names are celestial lily, the fall flowering Ixia, and the happy hour flower. It has some pretty funny names, yeah. And the reason why it gets those names, it has the exact opposite blooming time and schedule that the Bartram's Ixia has. So the Nemestylus blooms in the fall and is actually in the afternoon. So, and I think Roger Hammer coined that name, happy hour flower. So. But yeah, they're in the iris family. Yep. Mm-hmm. And so historically, they probably overlapped somewhat in St. John's and Putnam County, but I really doubt that happens nowadays with a lot of fragmentation of habitats. But it's quite possible because they kind of share the same kind of habitat. And so, what is the ecology of the Bartram's Ixia? I always kind of ask myself when I'm out there and I see plants, like, what is its role in the ecosystem, right? And so, basically, I've tried to scour the internet. I didn't find any research on the ecology of the Bartram's Ixia. So, but what I can kind of, deduce just from observations and talking with friends and iNaturalist data is it's just a really good pollinator plant and just another diverse food source for pollinators, meaning the pollen that it eats, And so we've seen bee flies, hoverflies, sweat bees, bumblebees, all pollinating it, and there's probably way more too. And there's also probably Lepidoptera, moths or butterflies that are using the stigma, for nectar as well. So, and so the best management practices and protection for this plant, it's pretty much the same with any kind of Florida habitat or plants. They're all sensitive and they require conservation of land, protection of their habitat, specifically the mesic flatwoods and the savanna habitats. And then you're going to have to burn them every few years or so. And what happens is that fire clears out the understory. It clears out these shrubs and trees that are going to grow much more faster. And eventually they will shade out the understory. And so when you have these fires roll through, it clears out these faster competing plants. And that's when you get these really heavy biodiversity levels in plants, which equals higher diversity of animals. Because of course, these animals are eating these plants for food and, shelter. So the Bartram's Ixia is pretty rare in its habitat, but it's actually pretty easy to grow, which is pretty ironic. And you can use seed or divide the bulbs up and plant them that way. It requires like a moist, sandy, loamy soil and really needs full sun, but it can tolerate some part shade. And so what I call like pot culture, which is like any plant that's in a pot, right? It's a much different care than it would be in its habitat. So when I have any plant in a pot, the pots are going to dry out faster, right? Easily. And then the pots are going to heat up because they're exposed to the sun. And so that's something to really consider when you have a Bartram's Ixia in pots, because you're going to want to water them probably more often. You're going to want to add more loam to the soil. Because in their natural habitat, they're still sandy loam, but it's well-drained sandy loam, you know? So, and then they don't have much of a root system. They're not really an extensive root system. They have a storage bulb, and that's really all they utilize when they're dormant. So they don't need a big pot. You can use a 4x4 pot. You can even use like a gallon pot, but just fill it up halfway. For me, like I really have enjoyed like waking up, going to my garden with either my tea or coffee, and being surprised by a Bartram Ixia that's been blooming. So that's kind of a cool experience. So, but over the years, our chapter and our plant sales, we've had a few Bartram Ixias being sold over the years, and that's kind of cool. So it is being propagated, and it is, you can buy it as well. So yeah.
How large have you seen your bulbs get, particularly those that you have in a pot?
That's a good question. So
my bulbs are all small.
Yeah.
They have been.
So I've had mine for a few years, I think like 3 or 4 years, and to wake them up, they just need disturbance, basically. Disturbance or fertilizer. You can give them like a slow release fertilizer, and that will generally wake them up because it kind of like mimics what fire will do, right? So my bulbs, they've started out to be like pea size, like a pea.
Right.
And now the other day when I was, I had a bunch of pots that I forgot about, and I knew there was Ixias in them. So I took the soil out. Sure enough, I had this like little acorn size bulb that had a sheath around it. It was really fascinating. It was just kind of covered in this little papery sheath, and that was the bulb of the Bartram Ixia. So I just kind of replanted them and watered them up, and I'm sure they will pop up in a few weeks, maybe in a month. So yeah, it's quite easy to grow.
And what are the seeds like?
That's a good question. So the seeds are really small. They're kind of like, how do I describe them? Smaller than a BB, and they're kind of like brown. They're kind of like, if you look at them in a microscope, they're like a really miniature kidney bean, like really tiny kidney bean with like some texture on them. Yeah. This photo right here is from Betsy Harris, and this is a really weird and rare deformity called fasciation. And this is a Bartram Ixia. And what happens with fasciation is it's 2 flowers that bloom in one. And it gives it this really strange, unique look. And this is very rare. So Betsy's very lucky to see this. And researching this deformity, it's a few things. It can be genetic, could be the environmental stresses or some kind which triggers a hormone difference. And that's what happens. And this fasciation happens more with like asters that I've seen, like the Garbaria daisies kind of have that. It's really fascinating looking. So I just thought I would share this with you because it's something I've never seen, and it's kind of unique. So.
And then do the seeds from fasciated plants produce?
Good question. Probably.
Well, I want that.
You got to get a permit. Yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of fascinating. Yeah. Another really cool fact about our chapter, when I first got involved in 2016, a few of the chapter leaders knew Roger Hammer. Roger Hammer is he's a naturalist and kind of famous Florida wildflower photographer. And he was asking us where he could find some Bartram Ixias because he was taking photos for his book. And I don't think this is his newest one, but the one I brought it up here, right here. It's where the Ixia is. It's called The Complete Guide to Florida Wildflowers. And as you can see in the photo on the right here, that's the same exact flower that he took. So it was a really kind of a unique experience to kind of show him where the Ixias were and to see his process of photography. And he uses like a macro lens. He has 2 tripods, one for the camera and one for this silly little contraption. It's called a clamp. And it's like a soft clamp that holds the flower in place. It doesn't squash it, so the wind doesn't blow it around. And then he always carries around this umbrella, a white umbrella, and it's for light diffusing. And so the sunlight isn't as harsh. So that's kind of like how he does his wildflower photography. So, but it was a unique experience, and he was quite a character. So, but that's it, everyone. Thank you so much. It's an honor to kind of present this to y'all, and like here are all my references from everything I researched. And if you're interested in it, I can email you this list of my references. So do y'all have any questions? Yeah, Betsy.